The story of the P-51 Mustang is one of innovation, evolution, and the relentless pursuit of air superiority. But to understand how this legendary aircraft emerged, we must first take a step back in time to the early 1942, when the world was at war and the need for long-range, effective fighters was urgent. In 1940, the British Royal Air Force was in dire need of a new fighter to help fend off the Luftwaffe during the Battle of Britain. North American Aviation, NAA, based in the United States, was given a contract to produce a new aircraft for the British. The result was the P-51 Mustang, a fighter that was initially designed with a Rolls-Royce engine but would later undergo a complete transformation that would make it a key player in the Allied victory. At first, the Mustang had a modest beginning. The aircraft's early iterations were equipped with the Allison V1710 engine, a capable but not exceptional engine for high-altitude combat. This engine limited the Mustang's range and performance, especially during long missions. But as the war escalated, so did the demand for a fighter that could protect bombers flying deep into enemy territory. In 1942, a breakthrough occurred when the Mustang was fitted with the Packard Merlin engine, a British engine that had already proven itself in the iconic Supermarine Spitfire. This was a turning point for the Mustang. Its performance increased dramatically. The Packard Merlin engine allowed the P-51 to achieve high speeds, climb quickly, and, most importantly, travel much longer distances. The result was a fighter that could accompany Allied bombers on raids deep into Germany and return home without needing to refuel. This innovation was crucial. Prior to the Mustang's introduction, Allied bombers had suffered heavy losses from German fighters. The Luftwaffe's Bf-109 seconds and Fw-190 seconds would often intercept bombers long before they could reach their targets. But with the P-51 Mustang acting as their escort, these bombers could now complete their missions with far fewer casualties. For the first time, the Allies had a fighter that could escort bombers across vast distances, ensuring the success of the bombing campaigns that would eventually cripple the Nazi war machine. By 1944, the P-51 Mustang had become the backbone of the Allied air forces in Europe. It had proven itself not just as a long-range escort, but as a deadly dogfighter capable of taking on German fighters with ease. The Mustang's versatility, speed, and firepower made it one of the most feared fighters of the war, and its influence would be felt long after the war ended. But the Mustang's journey wasn't just about technical superiority. It was also about the men who flew it. These pilots, many of whom had no previous experience in long-range combat, had to adapt to the Mustang's unique handling and tactics. They quickly became some of the most skilled aviators of the war, earning countless kills and distinguishing themselves in the heat of battle. Do you think the British could have won the Battle of Britain without the Mustang? Let us know your thoughts. In contrast to the P-51 Mustang's rise as a game-changer in the skies, the Bf-109 was a mainstay of the Luftwaffe from the very beginning of World War II. It was more than just an aircraft. It was a symbol of Nazi Germany's air dominance, a fighter that saw extensive use throughout the war, from the early days of Blitzkrieg to the final desperate days of the Reich. The Bf-109, designed by Willy Messerschmitt in 1934, was one of the first truly modern, versatile fighters. It was designed with a low-wing monoplane layout, a feature that gave it superior maneuverability and speed. With a top speed of 400 miles per hour and armed with a range of weaponry from a 20mm cannon to machine guns, the Bf-109 was deadly in both dogfights and attacks on bombers. It first saw combat during the Spanish Civil War, where it impressed both German and Spanish commanders with its performance. By the time World War II began, the Bf-109 was the backbone of the Luftwaffe, and it would remain in service throughout the entire conflict, undergoing numerous modifications to keep pace with the evolving nature of aerial combat. During the Battle of France and the Battle of Britain in 1940, the Bf-109 was a key player in the Luftwaffe's strategy. It was fast, agile, and lethal in close combat. However, one of the aircraft's greatest weaknesses was its limited range. German fighters, including the Bf-109, lacked the endurance to escort bombers over long distances, which became a crucial factor in the war's air battles. This was where the Luftwaffe began to lose the edge. While the Bf-109 was certainly an excellent fighter, it struggled to contend with the growing strength of Allied air forces, particularly the American long-range fighters like the P-51 Mustang. As the Allies developed better technology and tactics, the Bf-109 found itself increasingly outclassed, particularly in the latter years of the war. But that didn't stop the German pilots from continuing the fight. As the war progressed, the Bf-109 underwent multiple upgrades, including the Bf-109G Gustav, which boasted improved engine performance and weapons. These modifications allowed it to remain a formidable opponent even as the tide of war turned against Germany. Yet, despite these improvements, the Bf-109's role as the primary German fighter was becoming increasingly untenable. At its peak, the Bf-109 was one of the most successful fighter aircraft of World War II, with over 33,000 units produced and hundreds of aces flying it. Pilots like Erich Hartmann, the highest-scoring fighter ace in history, relied on the Bf-109 for their kills. Hartmann alone scored 352 kills in the aircraft, an astonishing feat that cemented the Bf-109's place in aviation history. However, the late-stage Bf-109, with its aging design and strained resources, could no longer compete with the relentless air superiority of the Allies. The Mustang's superior range and firepower meant that the Bf-109 was no longer the ultimate dogfighter in the skies. Despite its reputation, the Bf-109 was ultimately a victim of the Luftwaffe's dwindling resources and the Allies' overwhelming industrial might. Which aircraft had the better legacy, the Bf-109 or the P-51 Mustang? Drop your thoughts below. As 1944 rolled around, the war in Europe was reaching its critical point. The Allies had begun to gain momentum, pushing back German forces on all fronts. The P-51 Mustang, now a well-established weapon in the Allied arsenal, had proven itself to be a game-changer in long-range bomber escort missions. It was fast, capable of flying long distances, and armed with deadly firepower, the perfect fighter to ensure the success of Allied bombing raids over Nazi Germany. But the Luftwaffe, though in decline, still had its own ace in the hole, the Bf-109. While its effectiveness was beginning to wane, the German pilots, many of whom had years of combat experience, still made the Bf-109 a formidable adversary. In the skies over Europe, the P-51 Mustang and the Bf-109 finally met in combat. It was the beginning of the end for the Luftwaffe. One of the primary advantages the P-51 had over the Bf-109 was its range. The Mustang could escort bombers all the way to their targets in Germany and return home without needing to refuel. This ability was a game-changer. No longer did the Allies have to rely on fighter bases close to enemy lines or worry about their bombers being intercepted by German fighters before reaching their targets. The Mustang was there to protect them from start to finish. On the other hand, the Bf-109's range limitations made it difficult for it to counter the Mustang effectively. As the Allies' bomber missions expanded, the Luftwaffe found itself struggling to keep up. The Bf-109's short range meant it could not escort German bombers deep into Allied territory. Instead, it had to rely on intercepting bombers once they were already in the air, a task that grew more difficult as the Allies gained air superiority. The P-51's superior range, speed, and maneuverability made it a terrifying opponent for the Bf-109. But that wasn't the whole story. Despite its limitations, the Bf-109 was still a skilled dogfighter. Its experienced pilots, including aces like Erich Hartmann, were able to use their expertise to turn the tide of a dogfight, even against a superior aircraft. However, the Mustang's ability to take on German fighters at longer distances and protect bombers without risking catastrophic losses meant that the Luftwaffe could never regain the same level of air superiority it had enjoyed in earlier years. In the early days of the war, the Luftwaffe had relied on the Bf-109 to maintain control of the skies. But by 1944, with the Mustang leading the charge for the Allies, the tables had turned. The Bf-109 could no longer dominate the battlefield like it once had. And the Allies' industrial might, which produced thousands of Mustangs, ensured that the Bf-109's days as the mainstay of the Luftwaffe were numbered. In the dogfights that followed, the Mustang often came out on top, picking off German fighters with ease. The Bf-109's high speed and agility were no match for the Mustang's firepower, and the Allies' superior tactics made it even harder for the German pilots to survive. As a result, the Mustang quickly became the dominant force in the skies, and the Bf-109 began to retreat into the shadows. But what happened next shocked even the pilots themselves. By the time the P-51 Mustang had established its dominance in the skies over Europe, the war was already shifting in favor of the Allies. The Mustang didn't just alter the way air combat was fought, it directly influenced the strategic outcomes of the war, particularly in the air war over Germany. Before the Mustang's arrival, Allied bombing raids were some of the most perilous missions of the war. The heavy bombers, like the B-17 Flying Fortress and the B-24 Liberator, were capable of devastating German infrastructure, but they were vulnerable to the Luftwaffe's fighters. The Bf-109, with its speed and firepower, often made these raids costly, causing high casualties among bomber crews. Even with escorts, the bombers were still susceptible to the German fighters, especially in the later stages of their missions, when they were far from their bases and running low on fuel. But the introduction of the P-51 Mustang changed everything. With its longer range, the Mustang could now accompany the bombers from their bases in England all the way to targets deep inside Germany and still return home safely. This ability to stay with the bombers for the entire mission made a significant difference. Now, the Luftwaffe's fighters, including the Bf-109, found themselves facing off against a formidable adversary that could outfight them, outlast them, and protect the bombers effectively. The impact of the Mustang's range was felt immediately. Allied bombers could now strike deeper into Germany, hitting critical industrial sites and military targets that had previously been out of reach. The P-51's ability to maintain air superiority meant that German fighters were no longer able to prevent these bombing raids. The destruction of key German infrastructure, such as factories and oil refineries, severely crippled the German war machine, and this shift in the air war proved pivotal in the eventual Allied victory. The Mustang's influence extended beyond just strategic bombing raids. It also had a profound effect on the morale of the Allied forces. The bombers, once sitting ducks in the sky, were now well protected by a fighter that was among the best in the world. This boosted the confidence of the crews flying these bombers, knowing they had the protection of a powerful escort. On the German side, however, the psychological impact was equally profound. The Luftwaffe pilots, once accustomed to being the aggressors, now found themselves on the defensive, outgunned and outnumbered in the skies over Europe. The Mustang's impact was felt not just on the battlefield, but in the strategic planning of the war. It allowed the Allies to pursue a more aggressive bombing strategy, targeting Germany's heartland without fear of overwhelming losses. The destruction of the Luftwaffe's ability to defend its skies paved the way for the successful D-Day invasion, which would be the beginning of the end for Nazi Germany. The Bf-109, once considered the superior fighter, now faced a grim reality. Despite its long service and the skill of its pilots, the Bf-109 was outclassed in terms of range, firepower, and the sheer numbers of P-51 seconds in the air. The Luftwaffe's losses mounted, and the once proud fighter became a symbol of the declining fortunes of Nazi Germany. Was the P-51 the key to winning World War II? Let us know your thoughts.